Digest is a media platform to discuss the social and political issues affecting Black and Brown communities around the world.
The show blends humor and the lived experiences of people from the community.
Our conversations lift contradictions we live with. Sometimes we are intellectual, others straight ratchet.
Welcome. We hope you enjoy. Welcome back. We are excited to be back. The Hood Digest podcast is back in full effect. We're excited to be kicking off season 3. Mikia, I'm so excited to see your face again now in this virtual context. And we know that we are only 2 weeks away from elections. So today what we are doing is bringing some very special and knowledgeable guests to talk to us about things that are popping off in the elections. We are going to be focusing on some propositions that we know are going to be impacting our communities. And we're also going to be talking about why Jackie Lacey has to go. We've been away for a whole year. We've really missed each and every single one of you. But let me tell you that we are really honored to have you back. And Mikia, it's been such a long time, and I'm really happy to see you here.
Hey, everybody. It's so good to be back. I miss y'all too. I've especially miss Elmer, not only because of this pandemic, but because the last time we recorded was over a year ago. And y'all may remember I was very pregnant at the time. And so it's been a whole year since baby Justice was born. He was born October 13, 2019. And we just, have been living life kind of in a cool way in a sense and a crazy way, right? Because right around the time when the quarantine hit was when I was going back to work. And so I was planning to be back, traveling and doing everything I do for work. And then all of a sudden a quarantine hit. So I'm at home with the baby 24/7, which is a blessing in disguise. And at the same time, it's a little crazy because, the baby has been growing up through the quarantine. And so at the early stages of the quarantine, he was about 3.5, 4 months. And I was chilling like, oh, okay, I can, be on my Zoom calls and everything. The baby's just taking a nap. And then, he wasn't very mobile. And then a few months in, he started crawling everywhere. He was, knocking stuff over. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't be on the Zoom at the same time that the baby is awake. And so Daniel and I have had to kind of adjust. But it's been an intense year to say the least, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. But it's also been a really great year. I feel blessed to have a little human in my life to kind of weather the storm. I feel like I owe him everything because I don't know if I would be able to get through this quarantine and everything else without the joy of seeing this little person who has no idea what's going on in the world and just so happy and, growing up and kind of oblivious and in a sense protected and sheltered from the insanity of the world that we live in. So happy to be back.
Congratulations to you and Daniel, and happy birthday to baby Justice, who you all have to take a peek at this child who is not only precious, but just the happiest baby that you can ever imagine, and already a social justice warrior.
Thank you, Elmer. And maybe when this quarantine is over, y'all see him out in the streets because, he's been out protesting since he was 10 days old, literally. And we're going to get into that actually because his first protest was at the Jackie Lacey Must Go 2-year anniversary rally in front of the Hall of Justice. And so we were out there in the streets with the 10-day-old baby and, but you won't see him on social media because we don't post pictures.
Yeah. He was already putting his fist up at 10 days. It's crazy.
He was putting his fist up in the womb. I got pictures. I promise. I do.
I'd expect no less from you and Daniel.
Right.
So why don't we bring on our first guest and kick this conversation off?
Yes, let's bring on our first guest. So I'm really honored to introduce our first guest, who I call Mama Paula. And many of us in Black Lives Matter call Mama Paula because she is a mother of the movement for Black Lives and BLM LA and a member who's been around for a long time and actually the visionary for the work we've been doing around getting Jackie Lacey out of office. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, Jackie Lacey is the district attorney in LA County. I'm actually let Mama Paula tell everybody who she is and what she's been doing. But you probably have heard that BLM has been out in these streets for almost 3 years now, actually, it has been 3 years, to tell Jackie Lacey that she needs to get out of office. And so we brought up Mama Paula. You all can call her Paula. I'll keep calling her Mama Paula to share to share with us about who Jackie Lacey is and why we're encouraging, not only encouraging, like we're really insisting that people get her out of office. Mama Paula, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. And as you said, this is a very, very important aspect of our election. I mean, everything on the ballot is important, but people may have seen the national attention and the national publicity that says how this DA race goes is very symbolic, because all over the country, criminal justice is being reformed, and Los Angeles County is behind. Jackie Lacey is our district attorney. A lot of people didn't understand what that meant until we started talking about it. But I think it's important to share. The district attorney is what we call the gatekeeper to prison. She and her office are responsible for all the criminal prosecutions in the whole county of Los Angeles. So think about this. We have about 10 million people in Los Angeles. We have cities that range from Pomona to Santa Monica to Malibu, Long Beach, not to mention Los Angeles, South Central, etc. So there's such a variety of people that her work, can impact. But let's talk about who she is. I did some research. We did some research after we started interacting with her, and we found out that the only legal job she ever had when she got out of law school was working in the DA's office. So basically, she's born and developed, professionally as a DA. She started there in the 80s, and she became like the mentee of the former DA, Steve Cooley. And it seems as if she was, bred and trained during the heavy crime and justice, very severe law enforcement period. And she's never moved from that. And some people say she's even moved farther into it negatively than even her predecessors. So Black Lives Matter started looking at her because part of our goal and mission is to look at officer-involved killings. And as we got into it, to look at the research, we found out that, the only way officers will be held accountable is if the DA prosecutes them. I mean, there's no other way. You have to be punished. You have, somebody has to take the blame. She has refused in her entire career, and she's actually been the district attorney for 8 years, okay? She's refused to prosecute any officers who have been involved or either committed a murder or allowed our citizens to die in custody. And when you think about this, she did charge one officer, but he's never been prosecuted or never gone through the entire criminal justice procedure. So the number of deaths that we have been monitoring is 622. So that's 622 state-sanctioned murders of Black and Brown, primarily disproportionately Black and Brown citizens with no accountability. And so, of course, that's our issue. But when you think about the things she's done, if there is any other criminal justice issue that you're concerned about, she has failed in that. She has pursued the death penalty exclusively against people of color. All of her cases except one have been Black or Brown. And when our governor said that during his term, he's not going to allow any more death penalty sentences, she said, I really don't care what he says. I'm the DA. I make the decisions. And what he says is his preference. It's not a law. She knowingly has relied on testimony of what we call the corrupt cops. These are the officers who people in criminal justice know that they have been in other cases and provided false testimony or manipulated evidence. And she continues to allow those individuals to come into court and testify against our people. Most recently, one of the very serious things she's been doing has to do with the COVID coronavirus issue. And while judges, the public defender, lots of folks have been evaluating many of the people who are in the jails, trying to decide how many of these people can we get out, because the jail has become like a center, a place where this kind of virus runs rampant because of the way jails are set up, because of the crowdedness, the closeness. I think the public defender's office came up with about 2,500 names, and she refused over half of them. She refused to push forward. And the public defenders, the standards for recommending people during this COVID crisis are people who have low-level charges, are people who are in jail because they have not been able to pay their bail. We're not talking about releasing, violent criminals. We want to release people for safety reasons and health reasons. And she looked the other way. The other thing that really troubles me is that she has excessively recommended that juveniles be tried as adults. The DA has that option. The DA has the option to determine what kind of sentence you get, what kind of plea bargain is accepted. She decides what kind of crimes you'll be charged with. The DA has a lot of power. And in LA County, she has wielded her power in such a negative way, so that we have had during her term, I think even more than during the previous DAs, more young people when they're at that age where they can decide if they should be tried as juvenile or adult. And of course, the adult sentences usually are harsher. She has consistently recommended that young people be charged as adults. So, when you talk about mass incarceration, you talk about the problems in jails, the problems in the criminal justice system. She is the gatekeeper, okay? She determines the size and the composition of the jail and prison population. And so just tying all this up, Los Angeles County incarcerates more of its citizens than any other criminal justice system in the United States. Okay, we are have some of the harshest sentences, and this is the individual we need to make sure we get rid of. So Black Lives Matter has been saying, I think, as Lamika said, for 3 years, Jackie Lacey must go, and she must go. She must be voted out. I mean, just pick a level of criminal justice that you're interested in, and she has failed. So yeah, Jackie Lacey must go.
Jackie Lacey must go. I agree with that. And I mean, as you were speaking, Mama Paula, I just thought to myself, Jackie Lacey sounds like a classic case of all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? She clearly is not interested in making sure that Black and brown people are lifted up. She's criminalizing our people, and she's upholding white supremacist practices in the criminal injustice system. And so, Elmer and I, the Hood Digest, unequivocally say Jackie Lacey must go. Get her out of office. Afuera, right? I also think it's important for us to lift up the fact that, getting Jackie Lacey out of office is not going to solve all of the criminal injustice issues that we have, but it is a first step. It is absolutely a critical and necessary step, right? And there was no guarantee that she was not going to be in the position she's in now, right? In terms of, she's been in office for 8 years, that's 2 terms. This could have been her 3rd term. The last term, she was, uncontested, meaning that she ran and nobody ran against her. And she eased her way on into office. And I just want to really uplift the fact that BLM has created a way for us to do something different, to see something different in the past 3 years of protesting and saying, if Jackie Lacey won't listen to the people and do justice on behalf of the folks who have, been their loved ones have been lost to state sanctioned violence. They've been murdered at the hands of police, and she got to get out of here. Obviously she has an opponent. The opponent is George Gascon, and he has to be held accountable too. If he gets into office, what does it look like for us to make sure that he's held accountable to the same things that we're demanding right now, right? That he doesn't fall into the same type of behaviors that Jackie Lacey is in. But I think the first step is absolutely to get her out of office. So thank you for all of the important work that you've been doing to raise this issue. And again, Hood Digest is behind it. Jackie Lacey must go. Make sure you get down to the polls or your mail-in ballot. Do not vote for Jackie Lacey. Make sure she gets out of office.
I also want to add that I think it's important that if you're anything like me, it feels like we're paying attention to elections a lot more. And I think that especially younger voters are starting to become more savvy in understanding the intricate layers of government. And Ms. Paula, you said it very wisely that now we understand what a DA is and the role that they play in whether justice is served when it comes to our communities. I think a lot of attention has been given to the sheriff lately because we have, quite frankly, a very corrupt sheriff who is also elected by voters. But those two people work hand in hand. And when you see people getting killed by the sheriff, when you see their responses where they're dismissive of our communities and they're dismissive of the families who suffer at the hands of police, the DA really should be the person listening to the community and holding the police department and the sheriff's department accountable for their misbehavior. And when they work together, it seems like they're more working in partnership and to uphold the injustice than they are to truly honor the lives of the people that are taken by the police. And so, and then I just want to, salute and recognize the role that young people and community members play in BLM and the role that they've played in centering your message and your demands, which were, going on for years before May 30th, which is when people took to the streets really worldwide, but countrywide and in Los Angeles. And I thought it was really brilliant the way that you were able to center your message and your demands in the chants that you heard on the streets. And now we have a real opportunity to bring justice to those families who have suffered at the hands of killer police.
And I just want to add, you talked about the connection Jackie Lacey has to law enforcement. In this particular campaign, she's received millions and millions of dollars donated from law enforcement bodies, what they call unions. We question them even using that word unions, but from not only the county law enforcement, the city, but cities outside of Los Angeles County. Their law enforcement units, their law enforcement unions are dumping money into her campaign. So her connection to law enforcement, to me, is a little bit closer than a partnership. It's way too close. It's way too close. She just recused herself from a case of the case of Tony McBride, who's the daughter of one of LA police union leaders who shot a young man named Daniel Hernandez a few months ago. And she felt she had to remove herself from even doing any investigation because she knows how much money she gets from the union that Tony McBride's father heads up. So she is corrupt as well as being, not a good DA. And so it's sad for Los Angeles. If we don't get rid of her, it's really sad. It's very sad.
Absolutely. Well, again, we're here to support that. Jackie Lacey must go. Thank you, Mama Paula, for sharing your wisdom on this and enlightening us on all the reasons why she is not the right person to be in this role. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Elmer so we can continue on with our conversation around these propositions, because there's so much on this ballot that we need to focus on. Jackie Lacey is one of them. We got 50 million other reasons why we need to get out to the polls and make sure we're voting on these issues because they're impacting our communities. Thank you, Mama Paula.
That's right. We're going to move on to talk about criminal justice, which is closely related to this topic. So they go hand in hand, and often DAs and prosecutors use the law as the excuse with which they bring a heavy hammer down onto our community. And so our next guest is going to help us talk about some of those important propositions. And we're going to bring in Lex Stepling to join our conversation and talk to us about some of the important propositions that we're going to be addressing in this upcoming election. And I'd love for us to talk about one that I find it particularly important, and that is giving folks who are returning home from prison the right to vote and the right to participate in elections. So, Lex, can you first of all just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work, but also just jump in and tell us about this very important proposition that's going to address, which to me is a longstanding issue that we need to rectify, and giving those folks the right to vote.
My name is Lex Stepling. I'm here in capacity as the co-chair of the Committee Against Pretrial Racism. We're working to oppose Prop 25. I also am the director of campaigns and policy at Dignity and Power Now here in LA. And so, yeah, we can talk through some of the propositions. Some of them are fortunately for us, not so complicated. And then some of them are. And, Prop 17 is, fortunately, like you said, it's more of just like an overdue thing that we need to move as fast and far on as possible. Justice involved people, which is, none of us like using that term justice, people who've been cycled through the criminal punishment bureaucracy, which is I think a more apt term for it, and who had their right to vote stripped from them as a result, people who are incarcerated, who have had the right to vote stripped from them, deserve that right. It's this is not one of the, we hear those terms, and not that our country has ever used these terms sincerely, so I don't want to pretend like they have, but these terms like inalienable rights are very important to be fought for as a principle. And one of those is the right to vote, the right for representation in what is a democracy. And somebody getting their life encroached upon by the criminal punishment bureaucracy for whatever reason, whether they were doing something wrong or not doing something wrong, should not be leveraged against their ability to participate in democracy. That's arbitrary, came from somewhere else. It's not in alignment with what we claim when we talk about what this is supposed to be about. And it's clearly leveraged as a tool to keep certain norms in place politically. So the right to vote, it's straightforward. That's not one that has any fine print. The only issue there is we always want it to go farther and farther and farther. So always look at who's being excluded. A lot of the criminal justice reforms today tend to exclude certain people depending on their charges, things like that. We know at a federal level, immigrants get excluded all the time. Those kinds of things are where that particular fight should exist, is us making sure that we don't let people get left behind. But other than that, that's a simple, straightforward one.
Yeah. And the U.S. Constitution says that slavery is still allowed for people who are incarcerated. And another form of punishment is taking, those people's right to vote. And this is a way for us to rectify that, that issue. And so thanks for sharing Prop 17. And now we'd love for you to talk about Prop 25, because I feel like this one, it's a little bit more nuanced. And I even see that some of our folks on the left are divided on this issue. So if you can jump right into why Prop 25 is a no vote, and break it down for us.
I'm happy to, and I'm glad we're having the conversation. And again, in the spirit of what's complex versus what's not. Like, we all are, again, also like Prop 20. We're a no on Prop 20. No one disagrees with that. There's certain ones that are straightforward. 25 is not. And it's a kind of thing that presents a moment where if we're doing this work in earnest, it's a reckoning for everybody, which is what kind of deals are people willing to cut? What kind of compromises are people willing to make? What kind of money are people willing to take? And in service of who are we willing to put our labor? And that's a question that unfortunately exists manifold when we talk about Prop 25, because we saw that momentum towards a crisis or an issue can be co-opted in the wrong direction, appropriated in the wrong direction, and that it can have either the effect of watering down that momentum, or it can have the effect of actually turning it into something harmful. And as I said earlier, I think a lot of us are prepared. I mean, I know everybody on this panel has had these experiences where the question is, does this effort go far enough? We are prepared, I think, and experienced in having those kinds of conflicts, like what I just said, not wanting to leave people behind. That's one issue. But when it comes to, does something actually do harm? That's another conversation to have. And so we need to frame this conversation appropriately, which is that Prop 25 is about implementing SB 10, Senate Bill 10. Senate Bill 10 was voted on in 2018 by the California State Legislature, and it was passed. And it started, Senate Bill 10 started as I would say, noble cause, to the noble demand to get rid of the system of money bail. That was the beginning of it. And so a bill was drafted. And plenty of advocacy folks got involved in it and said, it's not perfect, but it's good. I need to be transparent that most people started off supporting it and ended up not supporting it. I never supported it. And I never supported it because there were things in there that felt like red flags to me right away, including the proliferation of algorithmic-based risk assessments. I'll say more about that in a second. The kind of re-entrenching of the systemic drivers of pretrial jailing. And so I was worried that it was going to go in the wrong direction, but I'll be honest, it exceeded my worst fears. I never would have thought it would have turned into something as bad as it turned into. So the final version of SB 10 was essentially a rewrite by Judicial Council. Judicial Council is the governing body for judges in the state of California. They took that bill over at the last minute and rewrote it, what they call a gut and amend, but it wasn't really even that. I mean, they rewrote it. And the way they rewrote it it's like, imagine if you and your friend are developing a game, like a game type, like when you're a kid and you and your friends or your cousins or whatever come up with like a tag game and you're coming up with your own rules based on the neighborhood, like this tree over here is the safe zone and things like that. And there's always that one kid who wants to like change the rules at every minute because they don't like to lose. That's what Judicial Council did to SB 10. They took the bill and rewrote it so that they could make all the rules at every stop in the enactment of the policy. And so what we ended up with was a bill that says judges get to decide everything. Judges have omnipotent power over people's bodies. And then the other part of it was a deal cut with probation. I don't have to tell anyone from LA County what a corrupt and abusive and violent department, the Department of Probation is. And this gives them, this bill, if it's implemented, if Prop 25 passes, then probation gets the keys to the front door and the back door of mass incarceration. Not only are they going to be supervising people coming out of jail or coming out of prison, they're going to be supervising people while they await trial. And in addition to that, they get a blank check relationship with the state to say, in order to meet the demands of our newfound administrative power, we need a new check every year for whatever kind of money we ask for because, we have a lot we have to deal with now. So it goes back to a couple big fundamental questions, which is that pretrial jailing is the actual issue, not money bail. And this is a mistake all of us have made for a really long time, myself included, where we got used to saying things offhand. Oh man, all these people sitting in jail around the country because they can't afford bail. That's so wrong. If they could, legally innocent people sitting in jail because they can't afford bail is a blight on our whole society. And it is, except for, that it's not because they can't afford bail, it's because a judge set a bail that they can't afford. The bail industry, the bail bondsmen have never set anyone's bail in the history of the court system because they don't have that power. The system of money bail is used by judges as a lever to incarcerate people. They intentionally set bails that are too high because they know a person can't afford it. And then the bail industry and the bail bondsmen exist basically as we all got.
It's all good. We welcome the soundtracks in the back, especially when it's babies. So keep going, Lex. You're all good.
The judges set the bail. And then the bail industry, the bail bondsmen, whatever you want to call them, they exist kind of like a parasite to capitalize and exploit that system. Can I ask you a question before you, because what you're saying is it's real deep and I want to make sure that folks understand. So I heard you say algorithmic, right? So when I hear that, I think of Instagram, right? And Instagram deciding what posts I get to see whenever I open up the app. So what you're saying is that
there would be an algorithm or some type of formula that would decide if you deserve to go home or stay in jail?
Yeah. So we're getting to what the point that we're fearing here is that Prop 25 does not focus on the drivers of pretrial jailing. The idea that thousands of legally innocent people are sitting in jail is the problem. Money bail is a byproduct of that problem. But money bail is not the reason that problem exists. The reason that problem exists is because judges have the power to find ways to exploit loopholes in the law to keep people in jail while they await trial. And Prop 25 re-entrenches those problems or makes them worse. And so, and in doing so, they get rid of the system of money bail, and they're all ready to celebrate that as a victory because that's an easy villain to point to. Nobody thinks the bail bondsmen are good. But will this change the problem of pretrial jailing? No, actually, the way this bill is written, it's going to make it worse. More people are going to get incarcerated. And as bad as money bail is, we've all had situations where we had a loved one, a community member, whomever, who we're able to pool our resources and post bail and get them out. Under Prop 25, if a judge says, you know, Lex, I don't like the way you looked at me yesterday, I'm keeping you in, and let's not act like that doesn't happen. Under this current bill, y'all, if Elmer and Mikia and Inisis and everybody wants me out, there's nothing y'all can do about it. Now I'm in, and there is no more bail. There's no valve of release. This bill sets up a black box situation where you can't see inside of it. There's no transparency. There's no accountability. People can just get locked up. And then to your question about algorithms, what it also mandates is the use of a tool called an algorithmic-based risk assessment, which is, you think of Instagram, that's correct. And by the way, another way it's been used in our history is when we talk a lot, we're talking about LA, for example, we have like many big cities, a history of redlining, right? Redlining people out of being able to own homes in areas they want to. It was risk assessments that insurance companies used to justify that racism. It's the same principle being used now via an algorithm to determine a person's risk for reoffending or their risk for flight, as in not coming to court when they're supposed to. And that risk score gets calculated via an algorithm based on factors of a person's identity, their age, their past interactions with the system, in some cases their zip code, and their housing stability, and so on and so forth. It also sources its data from the police. And again, I don't need to tell you all that I don't think there's any public entity in the history of public entities that lies more than law enforcement. And so you're going to take data that's already racist, that's already classist, that's already biased, and you're going to run that through an algorithm and compute it and give somebody a score. And that score is going to say low risk, medium risk, high risk. But on top of everything, the judges still get to decide how those designations are placed. And then if the score comes back on Lex and says I'm low risk, the judge can still say, well, I still don't agree with that. I want to keep him in. And they can. The judge gets to override everything with the small exception of a few misdemeanors.
Wow.
So anybody with a record of any kind or anybody who's being targeted by law enforcement in any way is going to get kept inside under this. And we know that judges adjust exceptions all the time. We just saw the way they adjusted the exceptions to the current bail schedule based on protest. And so we know how people get targeted. We also know how easy it is to get a failure to appear, especially, you know, Mikia and Elmer, you talk about being from South Central. When I was a teenager, also living in South Central, I almost caught a case for a moving violation for making a wrong turn on a crosswalk, and didn't get the thing in the mail telling me when to appear in court, and then end up with a warrant and end up having to go before a judge and ended up catching a case. We know how much this happens if you live in a targeted zip code. This is what this is setting people up to have those kinds of points of data, those kinds of experiences be computed as points of data to then be ruled against them in a risk assessment. So the last point that I'll make, and because I know that, like you said, this is one of the most complicated ones, is that there are organizations who are supporting this bill who've struck political deals with probation in Sacramento and are frankly not being transparent about that. there are organizations taking lots of money from tech billionaires who are invested in these risk assessment instruments and not being transparent about that unless you do some digging. And so it's really unfortunate. We deserve better and we should demand better of our peer organizations. We know that, you know, how organizations accept money is complicated, and not trying to act like it's not complicated and not trying to make accusations that don't have nuance to them. But in this case, it's unfortunately definitely an example of kind of, you know, follow the money and follow the political relationships, and organizations that we all know, that we all have relationships with, that we all have people there that we are comrades and friends with, are still making a choice right now that is going to cause a lot of harm to our communities. And the question is, like, in the service of who? Why is your relationship with probation more important than your relationship with the community? And that's what we're seeing here. And so it's been a battle of ideas and a battle of information. A study just came out today that said Prop 25 would be good. I read the study. The study was funded by one of those tech billionaires, John Arnold of Arnold Ventures, who's a former Enron executive who's invested in the risk assessment algorithm. That's who funded the study. If you read the fine print and get to the last paragraph of the study, they basically said, yeah, I mean, this could all be incorrect. We actually think we're wrong, but we don't think so. And it's just one of these moments where some of the corruption of the, you know, liberal and progressive side of doing business is getting exposed too, especially when it comes to tech money. Yeah. So I encourage everybody to do as much reading as they can. Go to noonprop25ca.com. Look up the hashtag #NoOn25 on Twitter. And just continue to follow the dialogue. Today, Snoop Dogg just came out against Prop 25. That wasn't us, so I don't know who got to him, but
all right, Uncle Snoop, it was me. I talked to my Uncle Snoop, Lex.
Right.
No, I'm just playing.
Yeah, that was Mikia making that phone call.
It was me. I had to make a call.
So Lex, we have about a minute left, but I'd love for you to, you know, just say why Prop 20 is also a no vote.
You know, I remember, you know, Elmer mentioned, you know, last time we talked was probably 10 years ago, and we were working on a couple of projects actually that fortunately were not movement related, which is always nice to do. But at the time, Elmer was also one of the people helping hold the ground down for Prop 47, Prop 57. And those were really important first steps. Those were things that we need to take farther. And instead of taking them farther, Prop 20 seeks to roll them all back and replace them with more surveillance and more law enforcement. And it's interesting because some of the organizations who oppose Prop 20 but also support 25, I'm like, but 25 does the same things. It's collecting information on communities that allows them to be surveilled. Yeah. But Prop 20 is not complicated. Prop 20 is basically trying to, you know, we've had some gains in California in the last 10, 15 years. We've rolled back some of the things that exist here in California. California has long been the incubator for the project of mass incarceration. So much of what we see get proliferated around the country, be it mandatory minimums or 3 strikes or prison and jail construction, gang databases, surveillance, gets pioneered here in California. Yep. And we've been chipping away at that. Prop 20 will bring all of that roaring back. And it's an example of the way the ballot initiative system can be used for better or for worse, and how anytime anyone tells you to support a compromised piece of legislation and say, please just support it because we'll never be able to get it done again, it's false, because we got 47 and 57 passed and they got Prop 20 up on the ballot less than a decade later. So it reminds you to always fight for everything. And then B, this is just an example of being the guardians of our victories. And, you know, Prop 20 is potentially devastating, and it needs to be fought back, because things like 47, things like 57 were supposed to be first steps. They were not supposed to be final outcomes that we have to protect. So stop Prop 20 at all costs. And thank you for giving space for me to talk through something that is a lot more complicated, like 25.
That's what's up. And if you think Lex knows a little bit about the criminal justice system, he knows just as much about smoking cigars. So if you want to learn about what's out there that's good and affordable, and this man, the way that he broke down these propositions so beautifully, he breaks down cigars that beautifully. So make sure you check him out on Instagram if you want to learn.
All I do on Instagram. I don't.
That is hilarious. And Elmer, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Lex and I are in a coalition together, and our meetings are like 10 o'clock on the Thursday morning. And Lex is always, I mean, straight up, always outside on the porch smoking a cigar while we're talking on Zoom. Inevitable. I know it. And if he's not smoking a cigar, I'm like, what's going on, Lex? You having a bad day? I don't I don't know what's going on. So
Not.
It's the best combination.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you guys a ton. I have to jump onto another panel now, also talking about this with some students. But really appreciate it. I've been a fan of Hood Digest for a really, really long time. And I'm so glad this is back cracking and hope to be back on again at some point. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Lex. We appreciate you. Love you. Appreciate you being on. I am so glad we talked about Prop 25 and had Lex on here because for me, this is like super personal. I remember in 2018 when we were talking about eliminating money bail. And I'm definitely a proponent for it, right? I'm like, yeah, get rid of money bail. We actually talked about it on the Hood Digest before. We had Yvette Ale, who's now at Dignity and Power Now in La Defensa. Yvette was on to talk about, why bail is such a problematic thing. And then, of course, like many of y'all, I've had to bail people out. I mean, like really had to bail people out. And you know how it goes, right? The judge sets the bail. The DA's office, I'm glad Mama Paula brought this in, right? The relationship between all of these is so interconnected. The DA's office determines whether or not, a person should actually get the opportunity to pay bail or if they can get out on OR. And they make the presentation to the judge. Judge, we think this person can get on OR. That is, if y'all don't know what OR is, it's on your own reconnaissance, which means we trust that this person, if you let them out before they have to come back, right, and during this pretrial season, before they have to come back to court, that we trust that they won't try to flee. I don't know how many people in the hood are really trying to flee, right? Because you got bills to pay, you're trying to keep your job, and that's the reason you're really trying to get out, but they want to charge us for it, and that's why they have this bail. I've had to bail relatives out. The bail was set at $50K, and then they blinked at the DA wrong, and the DA was like, you know what, I think the bail needs to be $100K. Right. And the judge is like, okay, $100K. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So now I have to go to this bail bondsman and ask them for that much more money, right? Y'all know what it is. 10%. Can we negotiate it down to 7%? Out of $100,000, 10% is $10,000, right? And so who has $10,000 just laying around to pay to get somebody out of jail? So of course we don't want to have families paying bail, right? I remember Yvette talking to us about how people are, getting liens on their homes in order to pay for this. So I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that what Lex said is so true. The issue, like the bail piece is a Band-Aid. I mean, not a Band-Aid, but it's not the root of the problem. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to eliminate money bail. We do want to eliminate money bail. This is just not the way to do it, right? Because if I could not pay for as many relatives as I paid to get bailed out of jail, if I didn't have the opportunity to pay for them to get bailed out, they would have still been sitting in there. They would have lost their jobs. They would have lost their homes and all of these other, ramifications. So I just want to call that out because I think it's important to recognize, like, we're not saying, yes, keep cash bail, don't do the algorithm. It's no, we don't want either one of those, but we definitely don't want you to replace the bail with the algorithm because like Lex said, it's a black box that you go into and now you have no way to get people out and they're just sitting in there for longer and longer periods of time. And again, lives get ruined and already are being ruined when they can't afford bail. So it's even worse if they don't have that option. So anyway, y'all know I had to throw in my 2 cents because I've been real mad about this. I'm having debates with people about this on a regular basis. I'm like, yo, you ain't never bailed nobody out of jail. You don't know what you're talking about. I bailed many people out of jail. I'm telling you right now, no, I don't want money bail, but I also don't want this. And here's why. And it's racial profiling at its finest, right? It's like a whole other level of racial profiling. And the fact that it's all tied with the police and all of that, you should know is bad. It's all bad. Real bad Michael Jackson, as we like to say. So with that, we're going to move on to our next set of conversations here. We have two more sets of issues we want to talk about, education and housing. And I'm going to bring on Roque, who's my new friend. I have not met them before. This is my first time, and I'm really excited. Roque has already expressed their brilliance and just, I'm telling you, all of this work that you're doing with youth and focus on education and making sure that youth are empowered is something that the Hood Digest is definitely all about. Y'all probably remember we've had several young people coming onto our show and talking about the work that they're doing, not just around election, but just out improving the community. And so we wanted to bring Roque on to talk about the work that they're doing with Powered California. And really, I would love for you to share about a couple of different propositions that we're looking at. The first one is Prop 15, which increases funds for public education, right? Obviously very critical. We don't got enough money for public education. We need more money and more resources for public education. We'd love to hear about that. We're also wanting you to talk a little bit about Prop 18, which is to, give young people who are about to turn 18. So I love how it's like Prop 18 and it's, for the 17-year-olds who are about to turn 18, give them the right to vote if their 18th birthday is coming up. Why are we not already doing that, right? Like, why is it that if your birthday is on November 4th, you don't get to vote because our election is on November 3rd? That doesn't make sense. So we'd love for you to talk about those. And there's another one around affirmative action, Prop 16, which we are unequivocally saying yes on. We need affirmative action. And Elmer and I could talk more about that. Roque, introduce yourself. Tell us about what you do, why we should vote on these propositions.
Yeah, so hey, what's up, everybody? So my name is Roque Armenta. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm with Power California, and we're building youth power at the ballot box and also off election cycles. And for us, just working with young people, as many of you have seen, young people's votes are really important. Every election, but in particular this election, right? So if we look at LA County alone, 80% of eligible voters are between the ages of 18 to 24, and they're young people of color. I mean, we know issues as folks have been talking about police brutality, immigration, climate change are big issues that young people care about. And so they're really, I think, eager to have their voices heard and really see what's at stake, right? They really see that their futures are at stake. And in particular around education, we've seen young people be impacted by COVID-19 and just having to transition to college, distance learning, K through 12. We've been seeing all the inequities, right, really play out. And so Prop 15 is really important because one, in California, we're 41st in education spending, yet we're the 5th largest economy in the world. And that's partly due to the corporate loopholes that have existed since the 1970s. And so Schools Communities First is really about reclaiming $12 billion for our schools and communities by making corporations pay their fair share of property taxes. So big corporate property owners like Disneyland, for example, Amazon, right, Chevron, have been avoiding paying billions of dollars in property taxes. And so just to give you an example of how much money, right, Disneyland, which I know we all know, in Anaheim, pays taxes based on 1975 land value, right? And that's costing schools and communities $20 million each year. So that means that us as everyday taxpayers have to kind of cover that, right? And corporations are not only polluting our communities, but also avoiding paying taxes. And this is really important because one, just the issues around education, more support for mental health, more counselors, right? More resources to young people. We just have seen the issues around technology and broadband, for example, being really big barriers. And so Prop 15 is really going to help address both the impacts that COVID-19 that have had on young people of color and their families, but also go to like really important public services that people count on, right? So emergency response to a health crisis, for example, ensuring we have clean drinking water, fire protection, county hospitals, senior services. All these are really important public goods that we all use. And I just kind of wanted to make a note because I know right now the ads are going hard on Prop 15, right? Really trying to scare voters. And so just want to kind of note that, this is not going to impact homeowners or any small businesses. It only taxes commercial property owners whose property is worth more than 3 million. And so just want to let folks know it's not going to impact homeowners and it's not going to impact small businesses. So I think that's really important to kind of add. Also, to talk about Prop 16, right, reinstating affirmative action. And this really removes barriers in hiring and college admission for women, right, Black folks, Latinx and Indigenous people and other people of color. And I think, if we look at the fight for gender justice, right, and looking at the pay gap, right, we know that Latinx women are only paid 54 cents for every dollar that a white man makes, right, and Black women only make 62 cents for every dollar that a white man makes. And so affirmative action is really about closing those gaps and making sure that there's a level playing field, both in admissions and also in hiring, that we can take into account race and gender without quotas. And I think that's really important when we look at the racial justice work that a lot of folks have been fighting for. And then for Prop 18, right, expanding voting rights to 17-year-olds. So it would expand voting rights to 17-year-olds if they're 17 in the primary or the special election. And so this is really important, one, because again, we know young people have been incredibly active, right? And I think there's this misconception that young people don't care about issues or they don't care about voting. And so for us, as we talk with young people, and we actually did a poll with young people across California and found that 80% of young people this year see voting as, one of the major ways that they can make an impact in their lives. And they're informed about issues, right? Like we've seen young people at the forefront of climate change, March for Our Lives work, right? And so this really allows them to have a say in their future and be able to have their voices heard on issues that they're already organizing on, right? I think you have had many guests. So like Community Coalition, right? Inner City Struggle, like these are young folks that have testified, have gone to the board, have been involved in different actions, right? To really hold electeds accountable. And so this really allows their voices to count in a way that really matters in their future.
Thank you. Rapid fire with the education over here. Okay, I love it.
Dropping
Drop the
gems.
mic. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I love
for anybody that asks. So I know folks often refer to affirmative action as reverse racism, and so can you talk a little bit about how much of a nonsense statement that is?
Yeah, I think when we look at just the way the resources, right, distribution looks in communities of color, right? Like I think about me in my educational experience growing up in Hyena Park and go to Bell High School, like, you know, you look at the resources that young people have just in education, right? It's not the same amount of resources, right? So like AP classes, access to just tutoring, right? Like all these things that more wealthier, affluent communities have access to, we don't. And so, you know, this actually allows our context, the political context and the inequities to be taken into account because we're not operating with the same amount of resources. And so this really, evens the playing field. So to kind of say that it's reverse racism, it doesn't acknowledge the power and privilege that comes from growing up in a wealthy community. And so, yeah, it's nonsense.
It's also nonsense because there's no such thing as reverse racism, but you know, that's a whole other situation. I love the fact that we're having this conversation about one, undoing some of the historic injustices around education funding, right? Prop 13, we've talked about Prop 13 quite a bit actually on the Hood Digest in past seasons and past episodes. And we were kind of gearing people up for this like 2 years ago. We're like, yo, this is going to be coming. There's going to be a proposition in a couple years. Make sure you're ready. Make sure you don't buy into the lies, right? That somehow it's going to affect you as a homeowner. Somehow it's going to affect you as a small business owner. It's not about taking your money. It's about taking the money from the wealthy corporations that have been benefiting from these tax loopholes for literally 40 plus years, right? And we're the ones bearing the brunt of that. So I love the fact that we're having these conversations. I love the fact that there's an opportunity for us to vote yes on Prop 15 and make sure that we're getting those resources. $12 billion. Do y'all know what we could do with $12 billion? Like, I don't even know. Elmer over here making it rain. We could make it rain a whole lot. We could have some thunderstorms. We could have a hurricane with $12 billion in the education system. And as we're talking about young people, right, being in these streets, going to LAUSD, demanding that we reallocate resources, they shouldn't even have to do that. You are in high school. You should not have to be asking that the school district take money from police and, dismantle the police so that you can have resources for other things. So one, yes, we should dismantle the police in the schools. I'm just going to say that unequivocally again, Hood Digest, we support it. But we also need to make sure that we're getting additional dollars into our public education system for the students, right? And $12 billion is a lot of money that is going, left on the table. Not even left on the table, I'm sorry, put into the pockets of hungry, greedy corporations that don't want our kids to thrive. And we need to take that. We need to take those resources back. We need to make this happen. So I appreciate you bringing that up. The last thing I want to say is I really think that the voting age needs to be lower, period. Right? Because I'm talking to some young people. I'm like, y'all are geniuses. Like, I don't know if y'all lived on this earth before. I don't know when y'all were here, but y'all been here before. And if you can get a driver's license at 16, you can drive a car and like go buck wild in the streets with a car. Why can you not vote? Right? Like, I don't understand. I just don't understand why we have a voting age that seems so arbitrary to me, because that's quote unquote when you're an adult, but we can try a youth as an adult, right? I could try you as an adult, but you can't vote. It don't make no sense. So I'm all about it. Vote yes on, again, Prop 15, 16, 18. It is so critical that our young people have the resources they need in their education, that affirmative action is reinstated. Reverse racism is not a real thing. The affirmative action actually benefits our people so much. And it's a form of reparations, honestly, in a sense, right? It's a little bit of a form of reparations. Not fully. We still need reparations. Give me my money. Give me my 40 acres and a mule. But we need something to right some of the historical wrongs, and affirmative action is one of the ways that we're doing that. So yes on 16, yes on 18, get our teenagers the opportunity to vote, and then we will fight for them to get that right to vote even earlier. My bad. Cool. I'm gonna turn it back over to Elmer, and we're gonna bring in our last guest speaker, who I'm excited to hear from. Personal friend of mine. We up in all these coalitions doing all this work together. But Elmer gets to do the introduction. So here you go.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Roque, and it's great to have you on the Hood Digest podcast. Finally, we've talked about this about a year ago when Roque and I were working in the same office. So very excited to have you on here, and I'm feeling the beard. For everybody that's checking you out on the YouTube, we're gonna make sure we flash the beard. I'm jealous because since I was a kid, I always wanted to grow a full beard, and I can't. I can only grow like a half goatee, and when I try to let it grow too long, people start looking at me weird. So I'm feeling that. So
Hey, thank you.
Congrats on that.
I love how this turned into a beard therapy session for Elmer and some confessionals and a little bit of a, I don't know what's going on there.
I always wanted to rock the Aventura look, and I couldn't.
Aventura, listen. You already know. I love my boy Romeo. Come on now.
I can't get the full deck. Last but definitely not least, I want to bring in my new best friend. Unices and I have been spending a lot of time together lately. We were on a panel together a couple of weeks ago that I got the pleasure to moderate for the South LA Rooted podcast, and Unices was a guest on there. And just this past Thursday, she and I were guests on the El Show del Piolín. So we were sharpening on our Spanish language skills. I had the great honor to be invited to join Unices to talk about Measure J, which is on the LA County ballot. And that's the reason why we invited Unices to come here to talk about Measure J and tell us about why it's important for us to vote yes on this real important measure, which seems to really tie in all of the issues that you heard our guests discuss here today. So without further ado, Unices Hernandez from La Defensa, if you can please join us, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then jump right into Measure J.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I love Hood Digest. And one thing that I'm just so incredibly grateful for was that the list of words and language that you put together that really emphasizes the people first language, right? The humanity of people. And so I just appreciate y'all putting that list together in the glossary. So if y'all haven't seen it, check out the Hood Digest glossary. It's awesome. And I use it, I try to use it all the time in my work.
We gotta elevate that. We had, it's been a while since we brought that out. So we gotta make sure we share it out to people as part of the resource with this. So thank you for mentioning that.
Definitely. I mean, especially when you're in the room trying to fight these systems, right? Like, always trying to remind them of the humanity of our people. And so, the glossary does that. And so right now I'm going to be speaking in my capacity as a co-chair for the Reimagine campaign, or the Measure J campaign. It's always weird with these lobbying laws, like I'm just learning a lot of them, but it's just some of these small pieces I wish people could learn more about, just so like they could see like the tedious parts of the campaigns that are not a lot of fun and that are a lot of heavy work. So just wanted to uplift that. But Measure J, what it does is it's not a new tax, but it's a transformational change in LA County. You pay taxes all the time. If you're a property owner, you pay property taxes in LA County. When you buy things at the store, at Ross, at Target, if you're in LA County, you pay LA County taxes on that. All those locally generated tax dollars go into a fund that right now in LA County is worth $8.8 billion, which is much larger than many of the other budgets of whole counties that are in other parts of the state, right? And because the entire LA County budget is over $30 billion. So this is just a small piece of that budget. Measure J would move 10% of those dollars, which is about 500 million up to $1 billion, into two buckets. One is community reinvestment, looks like youth jobs, looks like housing support, small business support, and more jobs to actually build the construction of like community-based health services or mental health services, youth program centers, etc. And then the second bucket is alternatives to incarceration. So it's in LA County, we have the largest jail population in the entire country. Pre-COVID, it was at 17,000 people average every day. Post-COVID, we're at about hovering 14,000 people average every day. Most of those people, over 60% right now, are there pre-trial, meaning that many of them can't pay to get out, or they're stuck there because of the way the current pre-trial system is set up. And that means like one of the things I mentioned why I mentioned that is because Measure J would fund community-based pretrial services. Like, we need to get all those people who are there that can't pay to get out. We want to make sure that we can stop the incarceration of people pretrial. Measure J would help us with that. It also invests in other alternatives to incarceration, such as mental health services and substance use services. And so that's just what it actually does. But if I could get into a little bit of the background real quick on how we got here with Measure J, because I think that's super important. In LA County, we've been fighting for over a decade to stop jail expansion. We were successful last year when we pushed the county to stop the LA County Women's Jail they wanted to build in Lancaster, and the mental health jail that they wanted to build in Chinatown in downtown LA, where Men's Central Jail is. We stopped that contract. At the same time, we developed, in partnership with the county, a report called the Care First Report. It's called Care First, Jails Last, but for us, it's Care First, Jails Never. So that's the kind of attitude we walked in when we worked on this report, and you'll see that in the recommendations. But also, it builds off the work that was done by the Black Lives Matter movement, over 7 years ago, like that, their calls to really defund the police, that's where it came from. That's the group of people who were pushing the advocacy ledge all the way to the edge, which is to defund the police. And so those calls, also, unfortunately, what was like a weekly onslaught of what that felt like of, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, like things just happening in repetitive styles, having videos of that, millions of people marching across the country, all those things combined created the landscape where we were able to demand that the Board of Supervisors and push the Board of Supervisors to create Measure J, because it was put on there by them voting it on the ballot. Usually, they get put on there by gathering signatures. When you're outside the 99-cent store, there's people at tables with clipboards. Like, that's the process. But the other process is you can ask some legislators to do it. Or if you're at the state level or at the county level, the board, we were able to push the board to do it, which was done in 3 weeks. So nowhere, unlike the country, anywhere in the country is there Measure J, and nowhere before has there been a process to get a measure on the ballot like this, how we did it.
That's power. That's real power.
That's people power. It's real power. It's people power. I'm just over here. If you can't see, if you're not watching on the YouTube thing, I'm just like snapping away, smiling away, like, yes, because it's so true, right? Like, I think Measure J, the way Measure J has come about is really a testament to the power of the people and organizing, and how critical it is, right, for us to keep pushing through and fighting and fighting and fighting and not giving up, because these struggles are long. Right? They are so long. Defund the police. We've been saying that for several years now. BLM came into existence in 2013. We're in 2020. And it took, like Eunice said, all of these different things over several years. And I mean, that's not even, before BLM, people were pushing for all kinds of related issues, right? Lex mentioned earlier, Prop 47, Prop 57, all of that stuff is in the backdrop. And it is because of those things that we're able to get to a place where we can say, yes, right here, right now, in this moment in history, we want to see some major shifts in how we are allocating resources. We need to reimagine everything. We need to defund police, reimagine public safety. What that looks like is taking those resources that are given to law enforcement and giving it to the community in a real, tangible way. And that's what Measure J is doing. And I love it. I'm so excited about this measure. I don't think people, I don't see enough people talking about it because there's so many other things that seem to be more controversial, right? I'm hoping that people are not talking about it as much because it's like a no-brainer, right? Like, duh, get the money out of the hands of law enforcement, right? And put it into the hands of the people. But I'm just super excited, and I don't even have anything else to say except I love the fact that you were co-chairing this and you were leading this, and I love your smiling face and just like all of the positive energy behind it, because it's what we need. It's what we need in this moment in history, especially with the world falling apart. It's just so promising. Elmer, you got something more eloquent to say than me? Please.
There is someone who is campaigning against Measure J, and that's Sheriff Villanueva. Who
did you have to bring that man's name up in this conversation?
Because I think I want people to understand who would be opposed to something this good for the community. He sent out this tweet not too long ago where he basically said if Measure J passes that. He sent out a tweet of Mad Max, and he said, this is what the streets of LA would look like. And rightfully so, Twitter took him to task. You got to love Twitter. They drag people through the mud, and they did that with Villanueva, who deserved it. Because that type of fear-mongering is what drove California to become one of the states that put the most people in prison, right? And LA County to put so many people in jail. because people were afraid that folks that look like us would be in the streets, I guess, with swinging bats with spikes at every turn. But when people ask what would happen, right, if you fund youth programs, you see people like me, right? Like I am a product of a youth organization that picked me up at a young age and decided to invest in a person, like me, who, like, there was nothing particularly special about me. I wasn't, like delivering powerful speeches and like demonstrating that I was, just like the kid with the highest IQ in the room. But I was one of those kids who reached a fork on the road at a very young age. And I was in this organization that invested in me, but I was also getting in trouble. So when you talk about OR, like I experienced OR because when I was a young kid, I was out in the streets tagging, and a friend of mine and I got caught. Look at my employer is gonna start digging up these records right now. And when we got caught, the sheriff tried to slam us with all kinds of crazy charges, saying that we were breaking into trucks and stealing stuff. And because they do that, they load charges because they hope that you're going to cop a plea, because the amount of time that you would be facing for whatever it is that they're trying to pin on you, it just incrementally increases. And so luckily the charges were dropped, and I didn't have to worry about it, but it meant that I was, that I had experience with OR because of something like this. But if it wasn't because an organization invested in me, it would have been easier for me to continue down that route than the eventual route that I ended up in, which is getting me to the place where I am now, a more productive, constructive, good-looking member of society.
Somewhat productive, somewhat constructive, somewhat. I'm just kidding. I love you. I love you. No, but I think you raised a lot of really good and important points, Elmer. And I think I love the fact that we brought Measure J in at the end, and Eunices is able to speak to this because it does tie all of these different things together, right? It ties together what Mama Paula talked about with the DA's office and, being in bed with the law enforcement, and how we need to get Jackie Lacey out of office. And then we also need to figure out how do we hold law enforcement and the DA's office accountable to justice, right? It also brings in the stuff that we talked about with pretrial and, Prop 25 and Prop 17 and Prop 20 and all of that stuff. And then it also brings in what Roque talked about with regards to youth and education and the need for more resources to be allocated. And I know I want to make sure that people know we're not saying that Measure J is a silver bullet. It's not like, right, Eunice, is like, we get Measure J in and all of a sudden, because we got that 8 point whatever billion dollars it is, again, a lot of money, right? Make it rain. Hello. If we just get these measures passed and we get these propositions passed, we got $20 billion right there, boom, to do something with, right, that we didn't have before. And when I say that, the 20 billion is what Roque talked about earlier with, what was it, Prop 15, and then also with Measure J. Those are just so many more resources that we have. And it's not the silver bullet, but it is a step in the right direction. And it's a heck of a lot more resources that the community needs and did not have before, that we're extracting from places that are not actually set up to support us, right? I mean, it's so important that we understand that. We understand that we actually have the power. And I, again, love the history. Eunice, can you talk a little bit about how this ties to housing as well? Because I think people need to understand that. Measure J, those resources being reallocated, is there any way for some of those dollars to go toward housing, which is a huge need? We got, the largest homeless population right here in LA County. And I know that's something that's on people's minds.
So Measure J is holistic in that way, right? And so that's why you see the coalition of over 125 organizations that range from, folks working on houselessness crisis, and then like folks working on CJ, reentry, and abolition. Like, it's just a mixture and spectrum of people and orgs. And so when you talk about housing, that's a really big piece of it, because not only is housing needed for our communities just in general, but there's also like a real big need for community, like housing for people who have, needs such as behavioral health needs. Measure J addresses that in that it provides housing support through vouchers, through different financial means to support people in housing, but it also invests in the capital construction of housing, of affordable housing through alternatives to incarceration as well, so that it can house our folks who are traditionally left out of public housing because they have different types of cases on their records or things like that. So Measure J is holistic in that way, that not only does it address alternatives to incarceration, but getting people housing really is one of the biggest preventative keys for people, preventing them from getting swept up into the, traditional system of injustice.
Yeah, absolutely. Housing is one of the reasons why people recidivate so much, right? Why people end up going back into the system, because they don't have a place to live. They can't get a job because the system is racist, and they can't get a job because they have a record, and then they can't get a job because they don't have an address, right? So you have all of these different things tied together. And it sounds like, even though I said Measure J is not the silver bullet solution, it does help with a lot of those, and it's getting us a step in the right direction.
When we think about the budget, the sheriff gets over $3.3 billion out of our county budget. Measure J is not the silver bullet, but it's a real first concrete step in giving our communities a chance at actually getting funding. Every year we go through the budget cycle, and you've seen this, Lamika, at the city level. Like, we're fighting for freaking crumbs with these legislators. Even at the county level, like, we are fighting for crumbs. They just found $70 million for alternatives to incarceration, but it took us over a year to push them to find those dollars, right? And so budget advocacy is not easy. A lot of people who do it are privileged to be able to do budget advocacy because it's a hard thing to navigate and to digest. And so one thing we're trying to do is invest in that for Measure J. Like, there's a line in the measure that says there has to be an inclusive and transparent implementation process. So people that have been most directly impacted by losing their housing by the traditional system of injustice and other advocates could be at the table to push the county to determine and say, hey, we really prioritize A, B, and C that you need to fund as soon as possible. And then the 10% is the floor, not the ceiling, which also, when we're in a better fiscal place, maybe that could go to, because we know people just need housing, behavioral health support, like good jobs. And like, that's the stuff that people have been fighting for decades, right? It's not new. So we know that when we finally invest resources into that, we're going to get the results that we've all been saying that are going to happen, which are safer communities and whole families. So I'm sure that it'll go even higher than 10%. Like, that's just the floor. And the last thing I'll mention that I think is really critical is that none of the money that's moved through Measure J can go through the traditional system of injustice, right? So none of it can go to the sheriffs, none of it can go to the DA's office, probation departments, the courts, because we've seen how they've co-opted money, especially under Prop 47, intended for community-based health services, and it going to like the LA City Attorney's Office, or dollars meant for social services, from the state given to probation departments, and then probation departments sitting on millions of those dollars because they don't know how to allocate to community, and they shouldn't be getting those dollars. So we were like, nah, make sure that the money can't go there. So that's another caveat that I wanted to highlight, but it's forever. It changes the county constitution. It'll outlive the board. It'll outlive, this political moment, and it'll outlive our generation of organizing.
We are just truly honored to be back and up and running again. The Hood Digest podcast wants to thank each and every single one of you, Ms. Paula, Lex, Roque, Unices. This has been a tremendous way for us to kick off season 3. We appreciate you all for bringing your passion, your commitment to social justice, and just the powerful movement work that you're doing is really inspirational, and we appreciate you all for sharing it here with us today. And folks, remember, there are less than 2 weeks away until the election is complete. I don't want to say the election is going to happen on November 3rd this year, because the election is now. Votes are being counted. We know that this is going to be a historic election. 25 million people have voted across the country already. California has already broken votes. More than 1 million people have already cast their ballots. So if you have not yet cast your ballot, please do so right now. Make sure you listen to these very wise folks that were on here with us today telling you how to vote. And why it's important to vote for these very important propositions and against Jackie Lacey. And last but not least, make sure you check out the Vota, Vato voter guide. It's also available in Spanish, Vota Doña. This is for your families to make sure that they are also aware of what's on the ballot. And it gives them tips and tools on how to vote wisely and vote for the hood. So With that said, we want to thank you all. We're going to close out now, and just Lamika, I'm really proud to be back here with you. Daniel, I'm really proud to be back here with you, and so glad that now we have Baby Justice on the Hood Digest team.
Excellent. Well, thanks again to all of our guest speakers today. We really appreciate your wisdom. Listeners, we are honored to be back, excited to get into this new season. Make sure you get out there and vote. And we'll see you on the next episode. We love y'all.
Thank you for listening to Hood Digest. You can find our podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and Audio Boom.
You can find us online at thehooddigest.com and on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Follow us, like us, love us.
That's right.